I'm going to take you back to July 19th of 2017. That's when we had a vendor summit, and that was the first time that I became aware and saw that wearable technology finally took the form of safety glasses. And for when I saw that, that was the first time that wearable technology finally found its way to, in my mind, making it to the manufacturing floor in industry. So Daniel and I, from that point forward, started working on how we could then begin to implement that and finding our use cases. And today, that's what we want to share with you is what we've learned along the pathway and our use cases. So we're going to look through the lens of the early adopters. And I think one other important point to make is when this all started, my career is engineering, operations, all of those functional areas. Daniel is actually a member of the team. So you won't find IT in any one of our titles, and in fact, it's operations, building solutions for operations is kind of how our approach has been taken. As mentioned, we have other jobs, but we're representing the OpEx Leadership Network, and just very briefly why that's important is the OpEx Leadership Network is a consortium of north of 150 companies across CPG, pharmaceuticals, and equipment manufacturers who've all come together to do just what I mentioned, solve industry problems for industry by industry. I was one of the founding members a decade ago when there was just a handful of us that got together, and now it's become much larger. But what's important and what strings through our discussion is I was the chair of the Workforce Development Group, and within the Workforce Development Group, we built the engagement framework. And the engagement framework is real around workforce engagement. And engagement, how would I define it, is discretionary effort. Or in the case of technology, how do we create pull? We heard about pull earlier. How do we get pull for our technology into our organization? Now there's 47 elements that were identified. There's a white paper from 2015 that 82 pages that goes through this, but in essence, there's 47 elements to engagement, and one of 47 are tools. And the way I want you to think about this as you go forward and develop hardware and software and begin to implement it is all of these 47 elements represent a barrier to someone creating pull, a barrier to someone engaging with technology and or change. And so our objective is to lower those barriers to the point to where someone can make the choice to pull or to become engaged. And we need to understand that none of us in the room really truly can motivate anyone. None of us can really make anyone do anything, at least not sustainably. But what we can do is lower that barrier and enable people to make the choice to want to do it. Lastly, these tools can be vehicles for culture change, because really what we're looking at is culture change. How do we change? We heard a lot about the 30-year employee who's done it this way forever and now they have to change. It's all about culture change at the end of the day. So how do we lower that barrier and then begin to change culture? So our approach, of course, being in operations, is we want to go to the ecosystem. The ecosystem is the plant floor, the factory floor. And so what we want to do is we want to put the wearable technology into the floor and then find out where people find value. We want to see what they want to do with it, and then we want to start to develop around those opportunities. So now I'm going to take you to kind of a memory jogger of sorts, but what do we typically do? We think we know what someone wants as a solution, and we build pathways, and we expect people to walk down those pathways. But what can happen if we're off is we may have built the best sidewalks known to man, but people resist, and then ultimately they're going to take their own path. Probably, most likely, we're pretty close, and we would develop our pathways, then we maybe just about got there, but they might cut the corner. And so what our objective has been, lay down the pathways, find out very quickly where people take the new pathway, where does it add value, and then let's pave it over, let's institutionalize it, and give them what they want. And once you get them on the hook, then they're going to ask for more and more and more, and then guess what? They'll listen to you as well. So what we've done is taken an agile development approach, just like Scrum for software development, create foundational use cases, and let the users reveal where they find value. So that's the key to how, when we get into our use cases, to how we've approached it. And then my last comment before I leave kind of the cultural side of things is it doesn't matter if we develop a plan for 3 years, 3 months, or 3 days. I think the reality is no plan survives first engagement. So the minute you roll out technology, the minute you have the perfect plan, you better be prepared for it to change and change quickly. And you can make the choice to dig your heels in and be right, or you can be effective, which you can change course and adapt and then make sure that it gets pulled in. So we all want to be effective. So now specific to technology, organizational pull is directly proportional to efficiency gained times some multiplier plus the financial benefit. Now the financial benefit might get us started and it might help grease the wheels and keep it moving forward, but our technology, our software, our implementations will only sustain if there's an efficiency gained. Said another way, technology will only be embraced if it makes life easier and more efficient. Now I'm going to walk through our big bucket use cases, and then I'm going to hand it over to Daniel to talk some more details. So as we've walked through it through the eyes and the lens of the operations side, of course, over-the-shoulder remote support, we hear a lot about it. For us, it is just that, remote support, virtual tours, bringing the experts in. Clearly, that is something of super high value, and it's fairly easy to implement. So going after that, Daniel has a great example that he's going to show you of a factory acceptance test that happened half the world away, and we were able to send some people there, but clearly not everyone, so everyone could participate in that FAT. Next one, knowledge access. We hear a lot about knowledge access, and really for us that boils down to job instructions, how-to videos, drawings, schematics, same as it does for everyone else. And as we've heard, content takes a lot of time, effort, and money to create. It takes a lot of time and money and effort to sustain it and keep it current. And then even if all that's done well, if it's not easy to access, people aren't going to spend the time doing it. We saw the Lego video. If I didn't want to keep accessing the data, I'm just going to try to do it from memory and make mistakes. So knowledge access is great, but even if you have the best content in the world, if it's not easy to get to, it's going to be like SharePoint. No one's going to use it. We've all had that one. Then data, of course, real-time data for us, exceptionally important. Real-time data, data trends, statistical process control, that's fairly easy to access when you think about equipment. You got data and dashboards on your HMIs, you got it in your MES, your data collection systems, and even all the way up into the ERP if you want to go there. So the first level is how we bring the data to the person when they walk up to the asset. They have all the telemetrics available to make real-time changes, make real-time decisions without having to go back to the terminal or back to the HMI. And then the next incarnation for us is really that mixed reality. How do we overlay temperatures? How do we overlay speeds? And then be able to look at the asset and see where the hot spots are by the overlay. So that'll be the next incarnation. And then the last big bucket, again, these are the big buckets where the value lies, is documentation. We've seen a lot about documentation here as well, even all the way down to the lab environment. And for us, that means checklists, work orders, task lists. So there's the next piece that is of high value. For us, the documentation side is medium difficulty to implement. And depending on where you are, if you're in a very highly regulated, highly audited environment, then it has a tremendous amount of value. If you're not in that type of environment, there's still value, but maybe not quite as much. But documentation proves to be very important as well. So I'm going to hand it off to Daniel and have Daniel talk to you about some of the use cases that he's worked on and developed, and then talk about how you've approached the development.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. As Greg mentioned, there's 4 big buckets that we focused on, and those were over the shoulder, knowledge access, data, and documentation. So we're going to share some of those use cases that we've developed, and we're also going to share some of the complications that we've ran into and discovered as we've developed those use cases. So the first one, a lot of us are very familiar with augmented reality, the blend of the real world and the digital world. Here you see a video in which we are overlaying 2D content in the field of view of the person wearing the smart glasses. And in this particular use case, we are focusing on electrical panels so that people can become more efficient. They no longer have to go to a maintenance shop to look for the technical manual. They can access the information that they need real time as the camera detects the image target on the field of view. Now, one of the complications here that we see as we've started to try different solutions with augmented reality is, number one, resources. Regardless of whether it's a drag and drop type of programming for the application or if you actually need to go in there and have some background in programming, you're going to need a resource that has to devote some time to creating those applications. Number two, cost. As we've had conversations with a lot of different vendors, we have determined that cost is extremely high, especially when you start comparing the cost of an AR solution versus, as an example, software licensing for automation and controls. There's a huge difference between the two types of licensing. Then we get to look at the content delivery, which is falling right under the data bucket. Here, what we are doing is we are getting data and information and displaying it in the glasses. That data is coming from our manufacturing execution system server. And here we can bring not only that data, but we can bring videos, how-tos, checklists, et cetera, and we can bring them to the user at the point of use when they need it. Now, one of the complications here, as you can imagine, for example, technical manuals, it might not be that convenient for you to bring that into a wearable device where you have limited interaction with, for example, a PDF file. I know you guys probably have heard that technical manuals can be put into an AR application, but that usually applies more towards manufacturing facilities where you're actually creating something or assembling something. Here in our food and beverage industry, it's a lot different. We're usually using technical manuals to fix equipment if necessary. So scrolling through a 400-page document is not very efficient. We have the visualization use case that falls under the data bucket. And here what we are doing with the glasses is we are delivering a human-machine interface content, HMI content, into the glasses real time. So what this can do for us is we have a partner at one end of the facility that's running a piece of equipment, and if something in the opposite side of the plant stops, it's a domino effect, and it eventually stops down his machine. So for him to figure out what's going on, he either has to get on the walkie-talkie. Not everyone's going to have a walkie-talkie at the time, so he might not get an answer as soon as he needs it. Or he might have to walk from one end of the plant to the other just to figure out what's going on of why his machine stopped. So instead of doing that, we are allowing the user to pull down the monocle and pull the HMI screen in real time, in which he can access some of the alarms that are displayed on that HMI screen of a piece of equipment that's on the other side of the production area. Now, one of the complications here is obviously the resolution of the screen. If it's too big or if it's too overcrowded, then some of those screens might have some limitations as to what the user is actually able to see or read on that screen. And we are also shadowing the screen only. We don't allow the users to remotely control any pieces of equipment for safety reasons. And there's some hardware devices out there that do not really allow a good interface to control some of that controls equipment out there. Now, another use case, the remote support use case, one of the most common ones that we see out there in the industry. This is under our over-the-shoulder bucket, in which you pretty much call a service technician, a remote expert. You connect with them, and they guide you step by step on how to repair your equipment. And this is one of the use cases that use a single application where I encourage everyone to start getting a little bit creative. So what I want to show you guys here is that you can turn that single application and branch it out into 3 different use cases or more, depending on how creative you want to get with this technology. Here we are using it. We redefined it as live video collaboration. It branches out into remote support, factory acceptance testing, and live tours. So in this video that you see here on the screen, we are actually communicating with one of our technicians who attended a factory acceptance test in Australia. I was here in Houston, Texas, and I jumped on a call with him, and he was kind of showing us what he was seeing in that factory acceptance test. This is where we get really excited because some of these applications will serve multiple use cases for you. You just have to bring the technology over to your end users and ask them, where do you think this technology will add value? And this is a great example of that. So we shared some of the use cases that we've initially worked on, but really what we are hoping to bring to you is some guidance of where to begin your journey. This is a very long journey. Some people say it never stops. As we know, technology keeps on changing, and as the technology matures, you want to make sure you stay ahead of it. So here we recommend that you follow this structure, as you'll see the value here in a second. But first, we recommend you develop your use cases, choose your hardware, seek feedback, develop internally. That one is critical. And then partner with a solution provider if necessary. So developing your use cases. It's easy bringing technology into your space, but it's sometimes difficult figuring out what to do with it. So this is obviously going to be one of the most difficult stages of the whole project. And this is where we really encourage you guys to engage the users. as you start developing some of these use cases, you might want to start performing some failure mode and effect analysis. This will allow you to catch some potential barriers ahead of time so that you can overcome them quickly. Choosing your hardware. Since there's many hardware devices coming out very quickly out there, you really want to start narrowing it down. And a good way to do that is to start looking for hardware devices that, number one, fit the use cases that you already developed. So if one of the use cases requires you to use a camera, you know that the battery life is probably going to be drained very quickly, so you probably want to choose a hardware device that has a good extended battery life. Something that satisfies the end user's needs, that could potentially also be the battery life, but you also might want to think about comfort and how the user feels when they are wearing this device and how long they're going to wear it for. And then you also want to keep in mind any industry requirements that you may have in your space. For example, one of ours is safety. We don't want people to be wearing a binocular device that really covers the peripheral view of the partners. If they're going to be walking through the production floor environment, we want them to be well aware of their surroundings, right? So for us, it makes more sense to give them a monocular device that they could easily move out of the way so that they can still be aware of their surroundings. And something that we want to stress here is be very cautious if you ever let a company come in and choose a device for you, and we'll explain why. So get feedback. This is something you want to do continuously as you go through this process. You have to ask yourself constantly, what do your employees need to make their jobs more efficient and easier? Here's an example. We have 2 users who have been piloting simple applications, such as just taking the wearable devices to a plant, taking pictures, taking videos that they can come back and reference later. And this will really help you start gaining feedback from them as you start to develop some use cases and change directions. Here we can see that Juan Tran and Brian Martinez both had a theme in which they felt like the battery life was not very great, and it was not very comfortable wearing these glasses for an extended period of time. So what you'll come to find out is that their feedback is really going to help you develop some of those use cases, and they'll help you deviate if necessary as you're going through the journey. So develop internally. This is one of the very critical ones that you should follow. And development will lead to education. So you want to educate yourself on some of these software platforms that are available out there so that you can get an idea of how their system works. So before you initiate conversations with vendors, you might want to start playing with some platforms out there, developing your own applications. That'll give you an idea of some of the software engines that are commonly used by many. It'll also help you understand the true development and efforts required to make an application. And with that comes an better understanding of what the cost really would look like. So finally, choosing the right solution provider. Here, as I mentioned earlier, you want to follow it in this one specific structure. And from a personal experience that I'm going to share with you, I spoke to a company that develops AR applications. I wanted to better understand their application, their software, and their capability. And I told them that I had already chosen a hardware device that I wanted to utilize for our manufacturing space. And what this individual told me from the company is that you cannot create an augmented reality application for the device that you're utilizing because it does not have the processing power, render capabilities, etc. Now, the funny thing about that is that prior to reaching out to this vendor, I had already done that myself. So in certain cases, you might find that some of these vendors may not be very familiar with all the hardware devices out there since there's many. And in some cases, there will be vendors who will want to steer you away in a direction so that they can pull you and only offer solutions that they already support. Another example is a conversation that I had with another company in which I wanted to discuss specifically AR use cases that they support. You see it all in their marketing videos. You see it all over their website. We do AR, but once you actually start going through some demos with some of these solution providers, you end up finding out that it does not come out of the box. They actually have to partner with a third party or involve someone else so that they can actually deliver those kind of applications. So just something you might want to be aware of. Key takeaways. Be creative. This technology really allows for a lot of innovation. And you want to keep in mind, I like to define innovation as a product of inventions and commercialization. Without an idea, you can't have innovation. Without buy-in, your idea is going nowhere, so therefore you have no innovation. Educate yourself before committing to solution providers. As I said, this is a very important phase of the project because it'll help you ask the right questions. You want to engage the end users. You want to make sure that whatever solutions you start providing or whatever technology you bring over to the company is one that will be accepted by the users. They'll either make or break your project, but most importantly, for any technology project that you're working out there with, you want to remember that people should be served by technology and they should not be servants of technology. Thank you.